This was one of the most unnecessary deaths of a child I've ever.
Required to immediately sentence the defendant.
Unanimously find that the defendant should be
committed the ultimate act of betrayal. I'm going to sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of...
Offered already to Gina and John's family that, I am sorry for how things turned out. But,
Crystal Candelario's case is one of those stories that stick with you. Imagine a 32-year-old Ohio woman deciding to take a 10-day vacation, leaving her 16-month-old daughter, Jalen, alone at home with no food or water. The details of her trip are just chilling. On June 6th, she set off for Detroit and Puerto Rico, posting happy beach photos on social media. One picture showed her smiling, barefoot, in a bathing suit with the caption, "The time that is enjoyed is the true time lived." Meanwhile, little Jalen was left alone, starving and dehydrating in a playpen. To make matters worse, Crystal didn't just hop from one destination to another without a care in the world. She left her daughter to stay with a man for a few days. She then flew to Puerto Rico on June 8th, returned on June 11th, and stayed in Michigan with another man until she finally went back home on June 16th. Upon her return, the nightmare fully unfolded. Crystal found Jalen unresponsive in a soiled playpen. Her 911 call brought emergency responders, but it was too late. Jalen had died from starvation and severe dehydration. The medical examiner confirmed it. The little girl was severely underweight with sunken eyes and dry lips. Shockingly, she had fecal matter in her mouth and under her fingernails. She weighed 7 pounds less than she did at her last doctor's visit just 2 months earlier. It's devastating to think about. As the details came to light, Crystal eventually faced the consequences in a Cleveland courtroom, sentenced to life in prison without parole for aggravated murder and child endangerment. Things got even more disturbing when the prosecution shared footage from a Ring doorbell camera. It captured Jalen's heartbreaking screams, echoing through the neighborhood more than 2 days after being left alone. Can you imagine? Crystal had lied to the police about her vacation plans and even redressed Jalen before they arrived to hide her neglect. The Cleveland police had to review over 600 videos from a neighbor's doorbell camera. One video showed Crystal loading a suitcase into her car and driving off on June 6th. Another video, recorded around 1 a.m. on June 9th, captured the chilling sounds of Jalen's desperate cries nearly 3 days after she had been abandoned. Adding to the emotional weight of the trial, the courtroom was filled with Cleveland police homicide detectives, law enforcement officers, and first responders who worked on Jalen's case. A homicide detective, his sergeant, and the forensic pathologist from the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office, who performed the autopsy, all fought back tears as they described Jalen's death as one of the worst cases of their careers.
The ultimate act of betrayal. I'm going to sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of...
Judge Brendan Sheehan didn't hold back. He called her actions the ultimate betrayal. Can you believe traveling out of state and leaving a toddler to fend for herself? Just as you didn't let Jalen out of her confinement, Judge Sheehan said, so too you should spend the rest of your life in a cell without freedom. The only difference is the prison will at least feed you and give you water. Crystal, clearly emotional, spoke about her daily prayers for forgiveness. There's so much pain that I have in regards to the loss of my baby Jalen, she said, mentioning her struggles with depression. But she didn't try to excuse what she did. She ended with, "God and my daughter have forgiven me." It was a moment that left the courtroom silent. Her attorney, Derek Smith, revealed even more. Crystal had struggled with mental health issues for years. In 2023, she tried to take her own life with an overdose and was put on antidepressants. But she stopped taking the medication, which Smith argued clouded her judgment when she decided to leave Jalen and go on vacation. Despite these revelations about her mental health, the gravity of her actions couldn't be ignored. Prosecutors initially considered the death penalty, but Crystal took a plea deal in February, sparing her that fate but ensuring life in prison without parole. At the sentencing, Judge Sheehan didn't hold back. aligning with prosecutor Michael O'Malley, who called Crystal's actions unimaginable selfishness.
Committed the ultimate act of betrayal. I'm going to sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Now let's shift our focus to another intense courtroom moment involving Antonio Rosales. During Assistant State Attorney Anna Valentini's closing statement, things took a wild turn in the courtroom. Antonio Rosales, accused of kidnapping, sexual assault, and attempted murder, sat beside his translator, listening intently. But the tension spiked when Rosales objected to something the prosecutor said. As his translator relayed his objections, Rosales muttered, "She doesn't know that I did that to that one." Suddenly, he grabbed the computer keyboard and swung it at the monitor, knocking it over. The courtroom erupted in chaos.
That I did that to that one.
Please take the various
Valentini darted away from the podium, while sheriff's deputies rushed to restrain Rosales. Showing surprising strength, he continued to lunge toward the prosecutor, even overturning the table in his fury. Deputies finally dragged him to the floor, but not before Judge Deborah Nelson ordered the jury out of the courtroom. Furniture, tech equipment, and papers were strewn everywhere. But what was the trigger for Rosales' violent outburst? Valentini had called him a child molester, given the nature of his alleged crimes. Judge Nelson called for a 10-minute recess to allow deputies and court clerks to restore order. The next day, Rosales was back in court, this time in handcuffs, leg shackles, a belly chain, and a spit guard. The jury found him guilty on all charges, and he was sentenced to 3 life terms for his crimes. His crimes included dragging a 10-year-old girl into the woods, choking her until she lost consciousness, and then raping her. Because of the girl's age, the rape charge carried a mandatory life sentence, but Circuit Judge Deborah Nelson added 2 additional life sentences. She didn't explain her reasoning during the brief 3-minute hearing, which had originally been scheduled for the following week. There was little discussion at the hearing. The victim, now 15, was present with her family, but did not address the judge. Rosales also remained silent, sitting quietly behind the defense table, the same one he had knocked over during his angry outburst 2 days earlier. The victim had testified earlier in the week, recounting how her attacker had dragged her into the woods in Castleberry around dusk on November 1, 2003, as she was on her way to the grocery store on her brother's push scooter. She described how the man choked her until she lost consciousness. Robert Nuff's case is a chilling reminder of how trust can be horribly betrayed. A former inmate, Nuff faced the death penalty after a jury found him guilty of brutally stabbing his prison pen pal, Regina Capobianco, and her boyfriend, John Mann, just weeks after being released. Nuff was convicted of aggravated murder and other charges in Cuyahoga County, Cleveland. The story of how he killed 50-year-old Capobianco and 65-year-old Mann in 2017 is truly shocking. They had offered him a place to stay after his release from prison, hoping to give him a fresh start. During his 7-week trial, jurors heard how Nuff and Capobianco had become friends through an inmate pen pal program while they were both serving time in the 2000s. Capobianco, who had a history of forgery, and Mann generously opened their home to Nuff when he had nowhere else to go. Nuff was released on parole on April 11, 2017, after serving 15 and a half years for aggravated robbery and other charges. Capobianco and Mann picked him up from prison and welcomed him into their home in Parma Heights. But things quickly took a dark turn. An argument broke out when they discovered that Capobianco and Nuff couldn't legally live together due to their felony records. Nuff became enraged when Capobianco chose her boyfriend over him. In a fit of fury, Nuff stabbed Capobianco 6 times and Mann 15 times. Nuff's defense was that he acted in self-defense, claiming he found Capobianco stabbing Mann. However, the evidence told a different story. After the murders, Nuff hid the bodies by wrapping them in blankets and covering them with trash in a bedroom. The couple was reported missing days later, but police initially didn't search the home. Nuff misled the police, saying he thought the couple was staying with friends. It wasn't until 5 weeks later, after neighbors complained about a foul smell, that police searched the home and found the badly decomposed bodies. Nuff's lawyers argued that he covered up the crime out of fear of being sent back to prison for a parole violation. Despite this defense, the jury found him guilty. 2 years after the murders, Nuff stood before Judge Dina Calabrese for sentencing. The judge could have opted for a lesser sentence, but chose to follow the jury's recommendation. Before announcing her decision, Judge Calabrese allowed Nuff, who maintained his innocence, to address the court. Nuff expressed regret for how things turned out and stated his intention to pursue every avenue to reveal the truth, acknowledging that he would have to live with the consequences for the rest of his life. After Nuff spoke, John Mann's son, Jonathan, addressed his father's killer with a powerful statement.
Life is not over. You are breathing air and you are on borrowed time. My dad is dead. Regina is dead. Their lives are over. You took my dad from me. You robbed him of the golden years of his life, and I miss him terribly. You killed a gentle and kind person who only tried to help you out. I don't know how to express the depths of my pain and horror at the brutality you displayed, the complete lack of remorse for your actions, and your destructive, selfish, self-serving nature. You have failed as a man.
In the end, Judge Calabrese sentenced Nuff to death. He appealed the conviction, but the Ohio Supreme Court upheld the death penalty. In 2018, Dunn was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for the 2012 killing of Rakeem Tariq Charles during a drug deal in San Antonio. Charles, just 23 years old, was shot in the upper right side of his back. The bullet severed his spine and aorta, leading to immediate paralysis and death at the scene. Dunn was quickly identified as the shooter, while one of his accomplices, Kevin Young, is still on trial. This tragic incident took place in a car at a Northeast Side apartment complex, all over a marijuana transaction gone wrong. And sadly, this wasn't Dunn's first run-in with the law. Just a month before Charles' murder, Dunn committed another shooting and was found possessing a firearm.
For possessing a firearm after this murder, he committed another shooting a month before this murder, and he's shown zero remorse.
His complete lack of remorse and long criminal record painted a bleak picture for the jury. Prosecutors, led by Jason Goss, were adamant about the need for the harshest punishment. They highlighted Dunn's extensive criminal history and his indifferent attitude towards the murder. Goss was seen comforting Charles's parents before making his case to the jury, emphasizing that a life sentence was essential to prevent further tragedies like the one experienced by Charles' family.
Who has to suffer, and this family who has to suffer because of the defendant. And that's why we're asking you for a life.
Dunn showed no remorse throughout the trial, appearing completely indifferent to the proceedings and the pain he caused. His attorney argued for a lesser sentence of 35 to 40 years, citing specific reasons for this recommendation. But the jury wasn't convinced. After just 2 hours of deliberation, they decided on a life sentence. Dunn's reaction to the verdict was as shocking as his crimes. He resisted the Bexar County Sheriff's deputies, swearing and causing loud outbursts as they tried to lead him out of the courtroom. Ultimately, he had to be restrained and forcibly removed. Amy Lynn Deal's story is one that's hard to forget. This 10-year-old girl from Phoenix, Arizona, suffered long-term abuse before her tragic death in July 2011. It's a heart-wrenching tale of cruelty from those who should have protected her. Neighbors even noticed the signs of abuse, frequently seeing Amy Deal being forced to walk barefoot on the scorching Phoenix sidewalks. They reported that Amy was often beaten with a paddle called the butt buster and forced to eat hot sauce and even dog feces as punishment for lying or stealing food. Additionally, Amy was made to sleep in the shower without any bedding whenever she wet her bed. Meanwhile, David Deal, who might have been Amy's father, lived in a tent in the backyard with his other kids. Out of all the children in the house, Amy was the only one who suffered from this cruel treatment. So what finally happened on July 12, 2011 that brought this tragic story to light? police officers were called to Amy Deal's home and found her dead inside a small footlocker. She had suffocated. Amy lived with her grandmother, Judith Deal, and her aunt and legal guardian, Cynthia Stoltzman. Also in the house were Cynthia's daughter, Samantha, her son-in-law, John Allen, both 23, and over a dozen other children. The family initially claimed Amy had locked herself in the trunk while playing hide-and-seek, but police suspected foul play because Amy's dead body was dirty and bruised, suggesting she had been forced into the trunk. After intense interrogation, Samantha and John Allen confessed. They admitted to locking Amy in the trunk as punishment for taking a popsicle without permission. Amy, who was chronically hungry, was forced to do jumping jacks, back bends, and run in 103-degree heat for over an hour before being squeezed into the tiny trunk and padlocked inside. The family reportedly abused Amy because they didn't believe she was a blood relative. On July 27, 2011, Samantha and John Allen were arrested for murder. Judith Deal and Cynthia Stoltzman were arrested for child abuse and kidnapping, admitting they had also locked Amy in the trunk before. Bail was set at $1 million for Samantha and John and $500,000 for Judith and Cynthia. In a disturbing twist, David Deal, who wasn't charged in his daughter's death but later pleaded guilty to attempted child abuse, asked friends and family for money to bail out his mother and sister. On August 10, 2011, all four were formally indicted in Maricopa County, Arizona. Judith and Cynthia faced multiple charges related to their treatment of Amy, while John and Samantha were charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and several other offenses. Prosecutors sought the death penalty for John and Samantha. David Deal, who had lived in a tent in the backyard, was sentenced to 14 years in prison on July 6, 2013, after pleading guilty to attempted child abuse. Cynthia Stoltzman pleaded guilty to 2 counts of mistreatment and 1 count of attempted abuse, receiving a 24-year prison sentence and a lifetime of probation on September 13, 2013. Judith Deal also pleaded guilty to attempted abuse and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, plus a lifetime of probation. As for Samantha Allen, she was sentenced to death by lethal injection on August 7, 2017 for first-degree murder. In addition to the death sentence, she received an additional 74 years for her role in the conspiracy and other related charges, making her one of only 3 women in Arizona's death row. John Allen was found guilty of murder on November 8, 2017, and was subsequently sentenced to death by lethal injection on November 17, 2017. Patrick Drum caused quite a stir when he changed his plea to guilty at the Clallam County Courthouse, openly admitting to a double murder that left the community reeling. Drum was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the cold-blooded killings of 28-year-old Gary Blanton and 56-year-old Jerry Ray, both convicted sex offenders. Drum made it clear he killed Blanton and Ray specifically because of their criminal pasts. Blanton had been convicted in 2001 for third-degree rape involving a 17-year-old girl, while Ray was convicted in 2002 for raping 2 children. Blanton's family insisted he was unfairly labeled a sex offender after being caught with his high school girlfriend. Despite this, Drum had a surprising number of supporters who viewed his actions as justifiable. "It is unfortunate there are those people who admire what he did," said Clallam County prosecuting attorney Deb Kelly, expressing her disgust. It all started on June 2nd, when Drum fatally shot his new roommate, Gary Blanton, at their home in Sequim, Washington. Later that night, he drove to Jerry Ray's home and killed him too. At 9:26 p.m., police received a frantic 911 call from a man saying, "Help, 911, I'm being shot," but they couldn't trace the call. Nearby, deputies found an abandoned rental car issued to Drum with an empty box of 9mm bullets and a note apologizing for the disturbances. The next morning, Ray's father found him unresponsive at home. As the investigation unfolded, Blanton's wife reported she hadn't heard from her husband but had received a text from Drum claiming they were going camping. When police arrived at Blanton's home, they found both doors padlocked and Blanton dead inside. After a 3-hour manhunt, police found Drum at 2:30 p.m. He confessed to the murders, saying he killed Blanton and Ray because they were sex offenders and felt it had to be done. Drum even admitted he planned to kill a 3rd sex offender in another county. Blanton and Ray were both known to Drum. Blanton's family mentioned that he and Drum had been friends for 9 years before the murder. During the trial, Drum tried to interrupt the prosecutor as she condemned him for killing 2 men with families. Blanton left behind a wife and 2 young children, while Ray lived with his elderly father and helped care for him. When it came time for Drum's final statement before sentencing, he refused to apologize. "It was never my intent to hurt the families. It's like collateral damage," he said, urging his supporters to leave the grieving families alone. As for the men themselves, actions speak louder than words. Superior Court Judge S. Brooke Taylor sentenced Drum to 2 life sentences without parole, plus additional years for burglary and unlawful possession of a weapon by a felon. Taylor Schabusiness faced the ultimate judgment for the gruesome February 2022 killing of Shad Thyrion. A jury convicted her in July of first-degree intentional homicide, third-degree sexual assault, and mutilating a corpse. Despite pleading not guilty and not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, the jury found she wasn't mentally ill when she committed the crime. Prosecutors detailed how Thyrion and Schabusiness smoked methamphetamine in the basement of Thyrion's mother's Green Bay home before she strangled, decapitated, and dismembered him. She then scattered parts of his body throughout the house and in a vehicle. The horror was discovered when Thyrion's mother found her son's head in a bucket and called the police. Schabusiness was arrested on February 23, 2022. Her behavior has been erratic, including attacking her previous attorney during a hearing, where a deputy had to wrestle her to the courtroom floor. Despite the homicide charge carrying life in state custody, the defense fought to include extended supervision or parole. "She's not a monster," said Schabusiness's defense attorney, Christopher Froelich, arguing that at 25, there was still time for rehabilitation. When given a chance to speak before her sentencing, Schabusiness simply said, "No, there isn't." Judge Walsh listened to nearly 3 hours of testimonials and arguments about Schabusiness's mental health, drug problems, her mother's death, and her love for her child. He considered the need to protect the community and the severity of the crime, which he said runs out of superlatives to describe. "This crime offends human decency. This crime offends human dignity," he stated. Walsh noted that in her police interview, Schabusiness appeared lucid and aware of what she'd done, despite her mental health and drug issues. The defense brought forward Schabusiness's grandmother, who along with her husband, is caring for Schabusiness's 2-year-old and in the process of adopting him. Appearing via teleconference from Texas, she testified that Schabusiness was very happy after her baby was born in 2021 and was a loving parent, but Child Protective Services wouldn't let Schabusiness keep the baby when she left the hospital. She described Schabusiness as having positive qualities, but said people took advantage of her. She believes they care, but they don't, she told the court, hoping Schabusiness could still contribute to society, despite needing to serve time. The court also heard from her father, who entered the courtroom in a jail jumpsuit and chains. He testified about her mental problems and how she didn't respond well to medications. Answering yes or no questions from the defense attorney, he mentioned the potential for psychiatric treatments to improve each year, suggesting the possibility for future parole. He noted her ability to love and insisted she should serve prison time, but have an opportunity for parole. Judge Walsh later remarked on the irony of her father in shackles, blaming the system for his daughter's fate. A pharmacology expert testified about the impact of chronic drug use on Schabusiness's mental health, explaining how high doses of methamphetamine can cause drug-induced psychosis. Schabusiness had admitted to using meth and marijuana daily before the murder. The expert commented on her claim of having 51 hits of meth that day, saying he'd never heard of such a high amount and needed more context about the dosage. The prosecution's arguments were concise but powerful. The state, reflecting Thyrion's family's wishes, argued that Schabusiness shouldn't be eligible for release, saying it was necessary to keep her in prison for life. They refuted the defense's claims about drug influence, highlighting her detailed discussions with police, which showed clear awareness and lack of remorse. The prosecutor pointed to her past drug-fueled crimes, including a 2020 arrest for driving 80 miles per hour in Green Bay and cutting off a monitoring bracelet. He used Schabusiness's own words against her, stating she committed the actions because she liked it. In the end, the severity of Shaw Business's crime and her lack of remorse led Judge Walsh to sentence her to life in prison without parole. This decision aligned with the prosecution's stance and Thyrion's family's wishes, ensuring that Shaw Business remains imprisoned for life. Thank you for joining us as we delved into some of the most gut-wrenching courtroom moments that left us all disturbed. What are your thoughts on those cases? Which moments shocked you the most? And do you think justice was truly served? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this video compelling, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode.